Right. So today we are introducing the Anglo-Ndebele War, and as a matter of recap, I think in the last lesson we made it clear that the whites had already arrived in Zimbabwe, but they had arrived in the Mashonaland part. So to herald or to complete the whole colonization of Zimbabwe, they were now left with the Ndebele part. And remember, they could get the land in Mashonaland. Mashonaland is the best climate for agricultural activities. But what was lacking in Mashonaland was also the gold that they had promised each other. So the rumor spread that even Lobengula's core or Lobengula's capital was built on a hill of gold. So the Anglo-Ndebele War, it was a war between the Ndebele and the British. And the period 1890 and 1893 was a period of tension between the two administrations, the Ndebele and the whites. So it was a period of what? Of tension. Like they were competing. So each of the two did not recognize the other. Right. So let us look at the causes of the Anglo-Ndebele War. Let us look at the causes of the Anglo-Ndebele War. Number one, the settlers' resolution that there would be no peace in the area unless the Ndebele were crushed caused the war. Like iwo ma whites aitoziva kuti muZimbabwe macho even tikatogara Mashonaland hamusi kuzogarika as long as maNdebele aripo. So kuti tigare takasununguka, we have to deal with them. So, and they even heard about how dangerous or bloodthirsty the Ndebele were, you know. So they could not foresee a situation where they could coexist with such a tribe. They've heard about the formation of the Ndebele state, how Muzilikazi left Chaka the Zulu, who was more dangerous than him, and established a state in Western Zimbabwe. They've also heard about maNdebele kuti vairaidha vanhu vaiita sei papangofamba gospel rari kuti maNdebele aiita zvichigandanga. So ivo vari kuti of which it wasn't wholly true. So ivo vari kuti tigarisane vanhu vamusemuland mavanhu tofanira kutodhila navo. So they were perpetually insecure. So it was this fear which made them to avoid passing through Ndebele. I think when we explained about their movement under the pioneer column, they avoided the Ndebele. So it was this fear which made them to avoid passing through Ndebele when they entered as the pioneer column. Leander Starr Jameson even once said, come what may, the Ndebele must be smashed and the country pacified. So this made the war inevitable. Even if the whites were going to say, of course, we are going to live in Ndebele, they were never going to be secure enough while they were living with the Ndebele in the same country. So this made the war inevitable. Then again, the failure to discover the second rand in Mashonaland, I think I once expressed that point. They couldn't find the gold in Mashonaland, so they resulted in the whites anticipating that the second rand was in Ndebele. So since the arrival in Mashonaland, the settlers were disillusioned because of the failure to find gold in large quantities. They realized that Mashonaland was not the El Dorado they had thought of. So according to Aimandaza, the BSAC realized that the view that Mashonaland was the second rand, the view that Mashonaland was the second rand was misinformed. Information ikuti Mashonaland makazara gold. Yanga information ikunyepa. The truthful information yanga ikuti ayo kumaNdebele ndokune gold. So this is in line with the J.D. Omakupa, who argued that far less gold was found in Mashonaland. So they turned their attention to Lobengula, and it was even rumored that a ridge of gold bearing rocks ran through Lobengula's capital, Bulawayo, and this could rescue the company. Remember, I had once expressed that the company's coffers had dwindled, like the company to broker. So they were in the frantic search for gold deposits, So one must realize that although the Rat concession gave Rose the mandate to do some prospects in Ndebele land, this could not be done in the presence of the Ndebele and with a king like Lobengula. So this gold could only be accessed after Lobengula's power was crushed, after they've done away with with the Ndebele state. So the BISAC thus envisaged a short and successful war that would either maintain or boost BISAC shares. So again, the other thing is the white wanted the large heads of Ndebele cattle. The Ndebele had beautiful heads of cattle, and they even wanted their grazing land too. So the white settlers admired the large heads of cattle controlled by the Ndebele, and the Rhodes knew that the Ndebele economy was based on cattle, and that the only way to control the heads was through war. And the rich grazing lands also gave the impetus to drift towards a war of dispossession. So what remained for Leander Starr Jameson was an excuse to attack the Ndebele. They needed to find what we call a casus belli. They needed to find a way yekuti vadena nemachi nemandi, because already tabudisa point yekuti vanga vatombotaura statement yekuti isusu hatimbofi takagarisana nevana. So vanga vakutoita zvekutsvaga muromo, vanozori kuno vanhu vakadaro vekuti anenge achitonoti waonetsani naye hauiti sei, then otoita zvinhu zvekuti anototanga nyaya from nowhere. Then when you react, that's what most narcissists do. They vanokuboha munhu deliberately. Then kana wareactawo semunhu, then otanga kuti ndiwo atanga yo, ndiwo wakutotanga kutofudza vanhu vese kuti ndiye anodenda, ndiye anoita sei, but ndiye anenge acreata a situation yakadaro. Zvangofanira kuti murume achiita zvemagirlfriends, kudaro, like narcissists are manipulators, they are also gaslighters. Gaslighting ndeyekuti iye ari wrong anoblowa the issue out of proportion, nyaya yazopesera yakwauri kuti anogona kutotanga kuti ndakatoenda kugirlfriend kwacho because iwe haugoni kuaina hembe. Uri kuona mareasons acho, besides aina hembe chete, musi ndakakuti ubike nyama ukabva wapisa unenge uchingotaura paWhatsApp panze pekuti aadmite kutadza kwaaita, anenge kutadza kwaita akuita sekuti iwo ndiwo unenge watoenda kugirlfriend kwacho ukaita sei, zvekutoti some of the gaslighters vanokufilisa bhegi zvekutoti ndazotadzei. So that was the case here. Mawaits anga kuda kutsvaga kuti then vanhu vese vachizoona vanozoti aiwa maNdebele ndo vane problem. So vakatanga nenyaya yeboundary question, that's another cause. Bozi time yatiri kutaura ipakusati pane mabhodha okudhindisa mavisa ochi, so kutoisira vanhu maboundary kwakuri sort of kusaiza vanhu, because mashona they could move to Ndebele ndo vachita yavaita, then the guys from Ndebele could move to mashona ndo zvisina kana boundary mukati. So the settlers they set up a boundary in a way yekuti vaiziva kuti vakada kucrossa boundary wozaiwa macrossa boundary and zvokutokonzeresa hondo. So the settlers negotiated the setting of a boundary between them and the Ndebele, but the significance of such a boundary was little or not understood at all by the Ndebele, who kept on violating it because they didn't know about it. So for Jameson, Mashonaland was not part of Ndebele, and Jameson decided that the Shashe and Munyati rivers were the new boundaries which the two factions would not be allowed to cross to serve for peace missions. So Jameson akabati susu Mashonaland aisi yako Lobengula, iwo uri weMandebele, you are king of the Ndebele. So iwo gara kwako ikoko, isusu togara chipana tine Shashe neMunyati river ndo maboundaries edu, ende vakatozviita deliberately because Lobengula nevanhu vake vanga vagara vachingocross. And remember, there was also a peaceful coexistence to some extent between the Shona and the Ndebele because chinoitika pachivanhu ndechekuti ukasvika panzvimbo unofanira kurespecta. Ndosaka waiona kuti maNdebele aitorespecta marain making gods emashona. Why? Because ndo vanga vari varidzi venzvimbo. Kuna anonzi materitorial spirits ekutoti ukasvika munzvimbo mevanhu unofanira kutedzera zvinoda vanhu. So maNdebele ended up respecting some Shona to an extent that they didn't need a boundary. They could interact, you know, it was just sort of a peaceful coexistence without any problem. So now the problem here is Now the problems are kuti pane boundary, you know. Anonzi Star Jameson ari kuti isusu tiri kwedu kuno imi muri uko kwenyu musa cross ende akatozviita deliberate ndizive kuti vanodini vanocross aida kungotsvaga pekuvabatira chete, right? So this implies that Jameson restricted Lobengula's route to Ndebele. The argument by Jameson was that the raids by the Ndebele upon the Shona disrupted their economic activities. Yes, because in some instances the Ndebele could raid the Shona and they could pass through Ndebele and into Mashonaland. So avari kuti no raiding yenyuruzvotikanganisa because whites anga akavhura mines and farms in Mashonaland and they had some Shona working in those farms and mines, you know. So so Lobengula never acknowledged the discussion of Mashonaland Ndebele. He claimed that the whole country was his. To make matters worse, the boundaries kept on shifting. Whites aitoita kutesta patience dzaLobengula vaigara vachichinja like zvavanoita magaslighters anonyatsa anenge achitsvaga anoda kuita kuvhima noise. Tanobva aita 3 days asiri kumba, aita 3 days asiri kumba, hakuna muriwo obva aregera kutuma obva atumira dhora chete ekukesha tende unotsvaga mavheji munotenga like kukutokonya kuti uite hasha chete uri kuona midzi dzacho. Yes, that was the case. So the establishment of the boundary meant the end of the raids. The end of the raids meant the change of the Ndebele society. And again, the end of the raids also meant the end of Lobengula's power and authority. Because unonzi umambo sometimes kutyiwa, so uri mambo unofanira kumbopota uchiratidza vanhu vako kuti ndiri chibaba. So chaito kuti Lobengula aratidza kuti ndiri boss, ndiri chibaba and the king. Maraids svika achipamba vanhu kutora zvinhu zvevanhu. So the fact that my raids are bviswa anenge angosara inenge yangoshiri isina mapapiro ratobepa rungopeperetswawo nemhepo. So Lobengula akabva feel like his wings were clipped. So the whites had come for economic exploitation which could only be succeeded in a state of peace and stability. So Lobengula had no intention of giving out any part of sovereignty and wanted no reforming in his kingdom. Therefore raids continued as usual in order to reassert his power. So this created tension between Lobengula and the what? And the whites. Then again, there was the matter of Lobengula's peace emissaries. Like the matter of Lobengula's peace emissaries made the war unavoidable. On 16 October 1893, Lobengula sent 3 of his senior indunas to the British High Commissioner at the Cape to ask about the military build-up that was going on. I think I once explained when I explained about the what? The pioneer column. Lobengula akatotumwa kuti koma whites ari kuuya kuzozara munyika medu, which is which. So these were Muntusa, Inguba and Ingubungubu. He asked the local trader Dawson to accompany them. When they got to Tati, Dawson went on a drinking spree with his friends and left the Indunas on their way. So they were arrested by the Bishop officials for being spies, and as they tried to flee, 2 of them were shot dead. Muntusa and Ingubungubu. So Lobengula was not happy. Because vanhu vake vanga atuma vakauraiwa, so anga akabva in a grudge. So again, there is also the dispute over the ownership of the Shona. Before the whites came, the Shona were subservient to the Ndebele, but now when the whites came, the Shona were now under the British, and they were even working in the mines and the farms which belonged to the British. So pakavanika kudhonzerana. Ndebele aiti Mashona vanhu vedu, varungu vachitiwo vanhu vedu. So the only thing left was kuti ngatingorwisana tione kuti varidziwe vanhu ava ndivanani. Because some of the Ndebele, the Shona paid tribute to the Ndebele. And again, on the other hand, there was labor insecurity to the Bisak due to the Ndebele raids. Their growing mining and farming operations depended on the labor that could only be guaranteed by the stability of the Shona. And the stability was shattered by Ndebele raids. For example, when some of the raids happened under Chief Nemakonde, Chili and Bere, hence war was a necessity on the part of the whites. And again, another cause is Rhodes' desire to facilitate the construction of a railway line cutting across Ndebele. Yes, because it caused the war. Rhodes already had the Cape to Cairo dream, right? He had planned to build a railway line from South Africa to Egypt, and that railway line was supposed to pass through Ndebele. So kuti itovako Matabeleland anofanira kutodhila naLobengula first. So Matabeleland was a stumbling block to the Cape to Cairo dream. It fell on the route of British expansion drive to the north, and the Ndebele were fiercely opposed to this and could not give up their land easily. So the BISAC regarded the existence of the Ndebele state as an obstacle to an effective communication link between their headquarters in Salisbury and the Cape. So plans were afoot for a railway line linking Salisbury to Mafikeng. So it was not likely that Lobengula would consent to the railway passing through his territory. So the Ndebele had never reconciled themselves to the fate of the British colonization of Mashonaland. So, that was the case. Again, the final cause is like the defeat of the Ndebele would herald the total colonization of Zimbabwe. The defeat of the Ndebele would herald the total colonization of Zimbabwe. Then, pani anozonzima immediate causes. We call them the Victoria incidents. Let us look into them. So, some of the chiefs now refuse to pay tribute to Lobengula. And Lobengula was angered at some point and killed some. In 1891, in the northwest of Salisbury, Chief Nemakonde was killed together with his family after stopping to pay annual tribute to Lobengula. And Lobengula saw this as a sign of insubordination. So an army was sent to punish the chief, and his army and survivors were captured. And shortly afterwards, Chief Chiwinie Fort Victoria was similarly killed by Lobengula's impi again in 1891 after failing to pay annual tribute. So the behavior of these chiefs were based on the thinking that Europeans were more powerful than the Ndebele. Like the Shona felt like they were more safe in the hands of the what? Of the whites, So vanga vatoni sort of kakufarisa wakakuonyera wakaenda kuti amtiti atina tribute atichabhadhara. And at the same time, Lobengula paari kuuya achiraid achiuraya vanhu ari kukanganisa ma-economic activities evarungu. So varungu vanga kuti munhu akutinetsa ngatirwe kana zvanetsa. So the Europeans were prepared to help the Shona, albeit for their own selfish reasons. So the Ndebele, however, could not let such provocations go unpunished. At the same time, the killing of these chiefs was unacceptable to the settlers, as this destroyed their mining and agricultural activities, because those settlers could use the chiefs to mobilize the people. Chief and power is right. Urubabata, ndosaka chinochida kuita any activity kumusha. Unotanga wasangana nevakuru vemusha vanovachiziva chivanhu. Kuti ndauya unobhadharira vana school fees kana kuti ndauya kunoisa chibhorani. Unopfuura nekumba kwaSabhu. Wotomutengera masuper 2 kana chii kuti mukwanise kutaura. That's how respected they are. So vanhu vese vaishanda mamines nemafarms vaikokorodzwa nemachiefs. Ndosaka kuti vakuru vemunombopota vachipa machief mota nechi because vane influence isingaiti kumamisha. Machief nemadzimambo aya anotorema anotopisa. Kubva kugara nekugara. Mawhite jaji vangasingangosviki kungotora vanhu. Maitotanga mataura nani? Nachief. Chief okupa list yevanhu. Makutofamba muchitora vanhu. So kuuraiwa kumachiefs manje kwakutokanganisa planet yese. So when Jameson complained, he was told that these matters were between the king and his subjects, and they were of no concern of white. So Lobengula said theirs was to get involved in their economic activities and nothing else. So this created a tense situation between the Ndebele and the whites. Lobengula anga kutopindura nafu. Kuti vanhu avatagara imi makatoita zvikuuya. Ende isusu kana tikuurayana tichinetsana paublack hwedu paafrican hwedu imi munopindira papi muri mawhite. Concentrate nekuchera gold nekurima zvamakafambira. Nyaya idzi makasvika dziripo kudhara. Ndo panozoitika nonzi maVictoria incident. MaVictoria incidents anotanga neinonzi the Gomara incident of June 1893. Ndo akazova my immediate cause. What happened? So the cutting of 500 yards of telegraph wire, which belonged to the whites by some Shona people, led by Chief Gomara, caused the war. So vakatora telegraph wire like tambo mhino dzemafoni nechichi kwakutanga kugadzirisa matanga emombe. So the BISAC ordered them to pay the fine. Vakabva vanzi bhadharai fine imhosva, and you are going to pay the fine in the form of what? Of cattle. So Gomara, however, paid using Lobengula's cattle. Gomara reported to Lobengula that the whites had stolen his cattle. Kurikona zvaiita. Kusaidire kuna naMatabeleland kunonetsa kuchengeta zvakaita mombe nechichi. So dzimwe mombe dzeMandebele dzaichengetwa kusaidire kuno. And dzichengetwa naChief Gomara. So Chief Gomara pawakafainwa wakabva watora mombe dzaLobengula. Bva vanobhadharisa faini. Then bva vanoudza Lobengula kuti mombe dzako dzabiwa nemaWhites. So Lobengula was extremely agitated. He was extremely angered. He was infuriated to an extent that you could hold his anger with your own hands. And akaviruka kaita hasha. So he punished Gomara so as to demonstrate his authority. Jameson retained the cattle because he wanted to avoid war. The problem was temporarily solved, but this incident increased the tension between Lobengula and the wife. The incident. So the stealing of Lobengula's cattle by Chief Bear of Mashawa, like Chief Bear wakabva vanomba futi mombe dza Lobengula. So Mashona futi anga kuti basa rekushandiswa nema whites. You know. So 15 miles from Bozi vaingotsvaga nzira dzekuti vangabohwa sei Lobengula. So 15 miles from Fort Victoria caused the Anglo Ndebele War. So Lobengula sent an impi of 200 soldiers led by Manyawe Ndumgandana, who was a senior Induna, to punish Bere and these people. Lobengula wanted to teach the Shona a lesson. However, it should be noted that the punitive exercise disrupted the whites' economic activities like mining and farming. And this did not go down well with the Bisak, which regarded Victoria and Mashonaland as part of their jurisdiction and the Shona as their subjects. So, Mashona pakaitika noiziva Mashona akabva atanga kutiza mumamisha vachingomhanya mumamission station kudzimba dzemawaidzi vachiti kutiza mandebele. So it disrupted their economic activities too. And eventually the Anglo-Ndebele War conflict culminated into a war as Lobengula's Amajaya failed to respect the directions given to them by Jameson. That is to leave Masvingo within half an hour. Vakabvanzi mimi muno tumbo kupai 1.5 hours kuti muni mubude muno then havana kuteerera vakaramba varimo. So within 1.5 hours the Ndebele were supposed to have crossed the boundary Shashe River. So the Bisak used this as an excuse to invade Ndebele. So the whites attacked the Ndebele, resulting in the killing of some leaders like Mugandan, which forced the Ndebele to take up arms against the whites. So thus one must note that the Bere incident was the Sarajevo incident of the 1893 War of Dispossession, which means it was the spark which lit the bonfire. Right. So we are going to round up this topic tomorrow. We are going to look into who was to blame for the outbreak of the Anglo-Ndebele War. Then we go on to touch on the cause and the results tomorrow. Then we are done.